Nietzsche never wrote to please, but to wound. His thinking was like a hammer, meant to shatter certainties and expose the hollow foundations of existence. If he could speak directly to 21st-century men, perhaps he wouldn't offer hope, but a warning. We stand before an era where spiritual strength has been traded for distractions, where freedom is confused with voluntary servitude, and where the promise of progress conceals a silent void. Nietzsche knew that men who cannot bear solitude end up enslaved to any ideology, religion, or passion. He denounced the mediocrity that grows when we prefer comfort to greatness, security to courage. Today, the risk isn't just living small lives, but losing the very capacity to desire something greater. What if the greatest enemy of your life wasn't suffering, but conformity? What if the real danger was accepting routine without struggle, without questioning, without intensity? If these words awaken discomfort within you, subscribe to the channel and follow this journey. This warning isn't just from Nietzsche, it's for you. Nietzsche held a clear vision about the danger surrounding humanity, the illusion of progress. He didn't deny that science advanced, that cities grew, that life seemed more comfortable. But for him, this wasn't a sign of spiritual elevation, rather decay in disguise. Modern man believes that because he possesses fast machines, potent medicines, and access to infinite information, he has become superior to ancient man. However, Nietzsche would ask, superior in what? Faster perhaps, more productive certainly, but deeper, more courageous, more creative, or merely more domesticated? Life in the 21st century drowns in distractions. We feel everything is within reach. Endless entertainment, instant communication, immediate consumption. Yet this excess of facilities creates subtle anesthesia. Man no longer tolerates silence, no longer faces himself. Every phone notification, every series we binge watch, every purchase made in seconds conceals a growing emptiness. Nietzsche would see in this not progress, but escape. A way to avoid facing the most radical question: why live? He already denounced in his time that European culture was sinking into superficiality. For him, true greatness lay not in collecting external conquests, but in bearing the depth of existence with its pain, uncertainty, and terrible beauty. Technical progress doesn't eliminate suffering, it merely disguises it. A longer, more comfortable life isn't necessarily a more meaningful one. What good is living 80 years if those years were spent on trivial distractions, without creation, without courage, without intensity? Imagine a man who wakes, works, earns money, buys objects, travels, posts photos, ages and dies. For society, he was a successful man, had stability, followed the flow, lacked nothing. But Nietzsche would ask, was he really alive, or was he just a gear that turned smoothly until it broke? The dark warning is this: progress without depth transforms us into disposable parts, satisfied to survive, but incapable of creating. Nietzsche would say we become increasingly dependent on comfort, and comfort for him was slow poison. For where there's absolute comfort, there's no challenge, and without challenge, there's no growth. The man who never faces cold, hunger, pain, or risk becomes fragile, lazy, empty. What technology does today is eliminate any discomfort. Just one click to satisfy a desire. But that click robs us of the experience of conquering something through effort, of crossing difficulty and emerging stronger. He believed life only gains weight when we bear the pain of living, not in the sense of seeking suffering through masochism, but accepting it as an inseparable part of existence. Modern progress tries to erase pain, but by erasing it, it also erases intensity, and so today's men live longer, but live less. They possess much, but are little. Nietzsche spoke of the danger of herd morality. Today, this herd doesn't walk in open fields, but in digital networks, repeating opinions, fashions, programmed desires. Man believes he's free because he can choose among 1,000 products, 1,000 series, 1,000 trips. But this freedom is an illusion. He chooses within the cage the market built for him. It's childish freedom, where everything comes ready-made without needing to create one's own paths. Nietzsche's warning to us would be direct. Beware of progress that promises happiness without effort. Beware of civilization that substitutes depth for speed, greatness for utility, courage for comfort. Because the price of this advancement might be the loss of the soul itself. It's uncomfortable to hear this because we prefer believing we're evolving, but perhaps we're merely distancing ourselves from what makes life truly intense. The 21st century man might live surrounded by intelligent machines, but continues without knowing how to answer the same question Nietzsche screamed, "Why? For what?" And perhaps it's precisely at this point that the warning becomes most urgent. If we can't give greater meaning to existence, progress will be merely elegant disguise for mediocrity. Among all images created by Nietzsche, one of the most disturbing is that of the last man. He presents it in Thus Spoke Zarathustra as a kind of caricature of the human being who lost the impulse to overcome himself, who no longer seeks anything beyond security, health and comfort. The last man is one who prefers a small life but without risks, to a grandiose life full of dangers and uncertainties. He wants no pain, no struggle, no intensity. He wants only to sleep well, live many years, have some pleasure, and die without shocks. Nietzsche describes the last man as someone who blinks, satisfied at everything. He doesn't suffer great tragedies, but also knows no greatness. He doesn't love deeply, doesn't create, doesn't take risks. He lives as if it were better not to live too much. He's the human being who contents himself with little, not from humility, but from weariness. This weariness is the great evil of the 21st century. Not physical tiredness, but soul weariness. The exhaustion of one who no longer has strength to desire intensely. Look around and you'll see signs of this everywhere. People who no longer dream, merely survive. Men who no longer believe in life projects, only await the next weekend for distraction. Women and men who substitute the search for meaning with constant entertainment, as if life was something to be endured between one series and another. This is the last man, not violent, not cruel, but lukewarm, extinguished, without flame. Nietzsche saw in this not relief, but tragedy, because what keeps life worthy of living isn't the absence of pain, but the presence of intensity. The last man flees from pain, and in this movement also flees from greatness. He trades the possibility of the sublime for mediocre comfort. It's as if he preferred living in an artificially lit room, without storm risks, but also never seeing the sun rise. This phenomenon becomes even more visible in today's world. We've never had so many tools to facilitate life, and we've never been so fragile before the slightest frustration. A small rejection, criticism, delay, and we already feel defeated. Nietzsche would see in this the decadence of spirit. The last man isn't just physically weak. He's incapable of bearing life's hardness. He wants constant protection, wants someone to tell him what's right, wants easy rules to follow, wants peace at any cost. But the cost of this peace is the death of the soul. Because whoever eliminates all risk also eliminates all possibility of great conquest. The last man might live many years, but his life is small, reduced to a sequence of calculated comforts. Nietzsche would see in him the worst form of existence, one that dares nothing, creates nothing, desires nothing beyond the immediate. The question he would launch at us is brutal. Have you already become a last man? Do you live only to avoid problems, to maintain safe routine, to not expose yourself to failures? Or is there still within you an impulse toward greatness, even if it costs pain and danger? Nietzsche didn't want us to accept the role of last man. He knew the price would be high, but the alternative was emptiness. For him, to live is to struggle, to put oneself at risk, to affirm life even when it brings suffering. The last man, conversely, says no to life. He reduces it, diminishes it, transforms it into something too small to deserve being lived. The dark warning Nietzsche would leave us is that modern civilization, with its obsession for comfort, security and stability, is manufacturing more and more last men. People incapable of bearing intensity, incapable of desiring beyond small immediate pleasure. And if this is humanity's destiny, perhaps the species won't end in wars or catastrophes, but in yawns, not in a cry of greatness, but in a tired sigh. Nietzsche knew that human beings fear solitude more than pain. Man prefers suffering accompanied to being at peace alone. We prefer a shared lie to a silent truth. Solitude for many seems a condemnation. But for Nietzsche, it was the most necessary condition of greatness. He said that truly creative spirits distance themselves from the herd, not from arrogance, but because they cannot breathe where everyone repeats the same ideas, where life reduces to conventions without intensity. Solitude is a test. When we're alone, there are no masks to save us. There are no social roles, no easy applause, no distractions to protect us. We stand face to face with what we truly are. And it's in this encounter that many crumble. Most flee from solitude because it reveals the emptiness we hide. By turning off screens, by silencing the world's noise, only the inevitable question remains: who am I? Nietzsche saw in this a privilege, because only in solitude can we truly find ourselves. Being alone isn't sterile isolation, but openness to oneself. It's not about misanthropy, but about courage. The courage to bear one's own presence, to listen to one's own thoughts without fear. In a world like ours, where everything conspires to distract us, where every minute is filled by notifications, being alone has become an act of rebellion. But why is this solitude strength, not weakness? Because it's where the capacity to create one's own values is born. Whoever never bore staying with himself, who needs others' constant gaze to feel alive, will never be free. He'll always be enslaved to opinions, customs, rules. Solitude isn't the end of social life, but the soil where spirit's independence is born. Nietzsche called this becoming what one is. Only alone can we forge an identity that isn't merely a copy of the herd. Think of an artist, a thinker, anyone who truly brought something new to the world. There was always a moment of withdrawal, silence, exile. Great ideas aren't born in crowds' tumult, but in the patience of solitary hours. The man who cannot bear solitude will never create something of his own. At most, he'll repeat what already exists. Nietzsche warned, whoever seeks only constant company ends up losing himself, lives others' lives, thinks with others' minds, feels with others' desires. Solitude, conversely, is a call to authenticity. It's where you discover whether what you believe truly belongs to you or was merely borrowed from society. There is, however, danger. Solitude can crush the weak. Whoever lacks inner strength feels devoured by silence, tormented by the absence of distractions. Nietzsche knew not everyone was capable of bearing this weight. Therefore, he didn't preach solitude as permanent escape, but as necessary exercise. A period of isolation, a dive into oneself, is like a forge. You enter fragmented, confused, influenced by everyone. And if you have courage, you emerge with your own flame, with a voice that's nobody's copy. The problem of the 21st century is that solitude was transformed into an enemy. We're surrounded by stimuli precisely to avoid facing it. We created a world where being alone seems like failure, where silence is immediately filled by artificial noises. Nietzsche, if he were among us, would say this fear of solitude is a symptom of decadence. It's proof that we no longer bear depth. He saw solitude as a privilege of the strong. Only those who dare to bear themselves can create something new. The weak hide in groups, repeat the same words, follow the same fashions. The strong withdraw for a time, not to flee, but to rediscover themselves. It's in this withdrawal that true contribution to the world is prepared. There's also a spiritual dimension to this solitude. Not spiritual in the religious sense, but in the sense of profound experience of life. When we distance ourselves from noise, we feel the strangeness of existence, the vastness of the universe, the smallness, and simultaneously the greatness of being alive. Nietzsche didn't want us to flee from this. On the contrary, he wanted us to dive into this abyss, because it's there that the courage to create is born. And perhaps this is precisely the dark warning for today's men. Don't confuse solitude with failure. Don't see it as disease, but as strength. The man who never separates from the herd, who never closes doors to listen to himself, is condemned to live a small life, made only of echoes. The man who risks being alone might suffer, might feel fear, might lose himself. But he can also become creator, owner of his own life. Nietzsche would tell us, embrace solitude, even if it hurts. It's in this silent space that you discover whether your life is mere repetition, or if there exists something unique you can offer the world. Don't flee from it. Transform it into your fortress, because only one who bears being alone is capable of one day being truly with others. Nietzsche never spoke of love romantically or sweetly. For him, love wasn't harmonious fusion of souls, but an arena of forces, a power game disguised as tenderness. He deeply distrusted the idea that we love to complete ourselves, as if we were halves seeking the other half. This conception, inherited from ancient myths and fed by centuries of poetry and religion for Nietzsche, was a dangerous illusion, because love, far from being harmony, is tension. He said that behind love, there's always the desire for possession. To love is, somehow, to want to make the other part of oneself, to want to mold him, influence him, dominate him. This doesn't mean love is only cruelty or violence, but that within it hides an invisible struggle. When we say, "I love you," often what we're saying is, "I want you to be mine, I want you to live according to my world, I want you to belong to me." It's hard to admit this, but Nietzsche forces us to face what's raw in the loving experience. In the 21st century, love is still sold as a promise of happiness, as safe harbor against solitude. Movies, songs, social networks, everything seems to say that loving is finding peace, being cared for, resting in someone's arms. Nietzsche, however, would look at this illusion with irony. For him, expecting peace from love is like expecting silence amid a storm. Love doesn't save us from chaos, it plunges us deeper into it. And perhaps therein lies its beauty and tragedy. Because while we seek love to be accepted, we enter it to compete for space. We want to be loved, but we also want the other to mold to us. We want understanding, but we also want control. Nietzsche would say, there's no love without will to power, without this tension between surrendering and dominating. Think of small, everyday scenes. A couple arguing because one didn't respond to a message in expected time. Another fighting because one went out without warning. Behind these banal conflicts, what's at stake isn't just affection, but power. Who dictates the relationship's rhythm? Who yields more? Who controls the narrative of what's normal? Love, under Nietzsche's gaze, is a subtle battlefield. But we shouldn't understand this as purely negative. For Nietzsche, life is struggle, tension, creative conflict. Love, in this sense, is just another reflection of human condition. The problem arises when we try to deny this truth, when we dress love in romantic illusions and demand from it a purity that doesn't exist. It's at this point that love becomes frustration, because we expect it to bring us calm, when in reality it offers us intensity. Nietzsche also knew that love can be a form of dependence. Many enter relationships not from greatness, but from fear of being alone. They use the other as anesthesia to avoid facing their own solitude. This love isn't strength, but weakness. It's love that enslaves, suffocates, transforms two individuals into mutilated halves instead of whole beings who meet. For Nietzsche, only one who has learned to be alone can truly love, who doesn't need the other as a crutch, but desires him as life affirmation. There's still a darker aspect, love as attempt to eternalize what is passing. We love someone and want that someone to never change, never leave, never abandon us. We want to fix in time what by nature is transitory. Nietzsche saw in this a form of illusion similar to religion, the search for impossible eternity. And that's why love so often wounds us, because inevitably the other changes, the relationship transforms, intensity dissolves. Whoever truly loves must accept this transitoriness, this uncontrollable flow. But if love is struggle, if it's possession, if it's transitory, what then is its greatness? Nietzsche would answer, precisely in this. Because it's in struggle that we grow, it's in risk that we feel intensity, it's in instability that we become stronger. To love isn't to rest. It's to be set in motion. It's having the ground pulled away and still continuing to dance. It's accepting that the other will never be completely ours, and even so daring to say yes to the life that emerges from this encounter. Nietzsche's warning isn't that we should avoid love, but that we need to face it without illusions. It isn't salvation, isn't rest, isn't perfection. It's struggle, tension, pain, beauty. Love wounds us because it demands we transform ourselves. And perhaps we can only truly love when we abandon hope that the other will complete us and accept love as that which challenges us, destabilizes us, and forces us to create new ways of living. Deep down, what Nietzsche would tell us is, don't flee from the hidden power in love. Recognize it, face it, and don't expect peace from it. Love isn't here to tranquilize us, but to ignite us. Few phrases provoked as much scandal as Nietzsche's declaration, God is dead. Many understood this as simple atheism, as if he merely wanted to deny the existence of a supreme being. But this phrase's depth goes much beyond. Nietzsche wasn't just saying God doesn't exist. He was showing that the belief that sustained the West for centuries had emptied, that the faith that shaped values, morality, and meaning no longer had force. God was dead because, even among those who claimed to believe, this belief no longer lived in the heart, but only on the lips. For Nietzsche, God's death wasn't cause for celebration, but for crisis. He knew that by removing this foundation, the entire moral, cultural, and spiritual edifice of society would collapse. After all, if God is no longer the ultimate guarantee of meaning, what remains? Who will say what's right and wrong? Who will justify pain and suffering? Who will give reason to life and sacrifice? The phrase, God is dead, isn't triumph, but dark warning. Humanity entered an era where old values crumbled, but we haven't yet created new ones. In the 21st century, we see this scenario clearly. Religion no longer occupies the central position it had in the past, and many consider themselves spiritual but not religious. The problem is that without a solid base, life risks getting lost in superficial relativisms or fragile ideologies. When Nietzsche announces God's death, he doesn't propose we live without meaning. On the contrary, he warns that without creating new values, we'll fall into nihilism, the emptiness of one who no longer believes in anything. Nihilism is, for Nietzsche, modernity's great danger. When we realize there's no longer absolute truth to guide us, we can react in two ways. The first is the fall. Resign oneself to nothingness, live as if nothing had value, as if life were only consumption, distraction and survival. It's the man who, facing God's absence, creates nothing, merely settles into small existence. This is passive nihilism, and Nietzsche saw it as a form of slow suicide. The second possibility is rarer and more dangerous. Assume God's death as challenge. If there's no external truth to guide us, it's up to us to create values. It's up to us to invent meaning that makes life worthy of living. This isn't light task, it's giant's burden. But Nietzsche believed that precisely in the middle of this void, some men would have courage to raise new horizons. He warns us, God's death doesn't mean we're free. On the contrary, it leaves us naked before the responsibility to create. Without fixed point, without divine law to obey, everything depends on the strength we have to affirm life. Many can't bear this weight. They prefer clinging to any ready belief, any ideology that tells them what to do. But Nietzsche would say this is just another disguise, trading God for another absolute, whether political, scientific, or moral. Deep down, the dark warning is this: don't expect someone to deliver meaning to you. If God is dead, the path can only be traced by you. This is frightening, because it places us before freedom's abyss. But it's also liberating, because it gives us chance to be creators, not just followers. The 21st century is a living portrait of this crisis. On one hand, traditional religion lost space. On the other, ideologies, consumerism, and even personal success worship occupy the place of new gods. Many worship career, image, money, fame. But for Nietzsche, these modern idols are nothing but fragile simulacra. They don't sustain the soul before tragedy, don't answer pain, don't inspire greatness. They're plastic gods, breaking at first impact. The true question for Nietzsche is, what will you do with God's death? Will you surrender to emptiness, to passive nihilism, letting yourself be carried by the current? Or will you have courage to create, to reinvent yourself, to affirm life even without guarantees? He knew this choice wasn't for everyone. Most will become last men, seeking only comfort. But a chosen few will dare to look the abyss straight in the face. These few, recognizing there's no given meaning, will have courage to create their own meaning. And it's precisely from there that the idea of the overman emerges, which we'll see ahead. For now, the warning echoes like a hammer. God is dead. There's no more firm ground beneath our feet. What will you do now? Will you kneel before new idols, or will you raise your own flame? This is the crossroads Nietzsche left us. When Nietzsche proclaimed, God is dead, he didn't just want to announce the end of an era. He prepared ground for something greater, the arrival of the overman, Übermensch. This concept, often misunderstood, doesn't describe a perfect being, a kind of unattainable superhuman. The overman isn't mythical creature, it's possibility, direction, calling. It represents the man who dares create new values when all the old ones have crumbled. Nietzsche saw humanity as a bridge, not as an end. Man, in his current condition, wouldn't be evolution's ultimate goal, but an intermediate stage between animal and overman. While many content themselves living as last men, small, secure, satisfied with banal pleasures, the overman is one who refuses this mediocrity. He's one who, instead of fleeing from void, decides to cross it and transform it into creation. The overman isn't someone seeking moral perfection or obedience to superior rules. On the contrary, he's creator of his own rules. He's someone who doesn't wait to receive meaning from outside, but becomes source of meaning, lives as artist of his own life, molding himself like a work in constant transformation. If the world is chaos, the overman dances in this chaos and transforms it into art. But it's not light task. Nietzsche knew that creating new values requires bearing solitude's weight, facing the herd's contempt, resisting comfort that calls us back. The overman is always minority, almost always misunderstood. He doesn't seek applause because he knows the multitude fears those who distance themselves too much. He's figure who frightens because he shows with his own life that we don't need to live as we've always been told. In daily life, this might seem abstract, but it's profoundly concrete. The overman can be one who, amid a society obsessed with consumption, chooses to live authentically, refusing cheap illusions. Can be one who, instead of repeating opinions, dares think for himself, even if it costs friendships or recognition. Can be one who, facing life's inevitable pain, doesn't surrender to self-pity, but transforms this pain into creative force. Nietzsche saw life as eternal return, the idea that everything we live can repeat infinitely. For him, the decisive question was, would you accept living your life exactly as it is, repeated eternally, without changing anything? If the answer is no, then you haven't yet learned to affirm life. The overman is one who says yes to eternal return, who accepts not only pleasures, but also pains, losses, tragedies, and even so affirms it's worth living. This is Nietzsche's most radical call, not living expecting future rewards, not living expecting redemption, not living fleeing from suffering, but living in such way that each instant is justified in itself. Living in such way that you'd say yes if you had to repeat it eternally. The overman is ultimately one who transforms life's weight into dance. In the 21st century, this call is even more urgent. We're surrounded by invitations to be last men, security, comfort, endless distractions. Everything pushes us toward light but empty life. The overman is one who resists this current and chooses intensity. Chooses to live not as one who survives, but as one who creates. Chooses not mediocrity of peace, but greatness of risk. Nietzsche knew few would accept this call. Most prefer the herd's anesthesia, but he also believed one single overman suffices to illuminate generations. It's enough for someone to live so affirmatively that his life becomes inspiration. The dark warning, however, remains. If we don't dare this leap, we'll remain trapped in nihilism, drowned in distractions. But if we have courage, we can transform void into force, pain into creation, life into work. The overman isn't distant promise, but concrete possibility, available to each one who dares look at the abyss and instead of retreating, smile at it. In the end, Nietzsche leaves us before a choice. Do you want to be the last man, comfortable and extinguished, or will you dare the risk of becoming overman? This is the decision that defines whether your life will be mere repetition or if it will be creation. We reach the end of this journey through Nietzsche's dark warning to 21st century men. What we saw wasn't invitation to pessimism, but to courage. Nietzsche showed us that progress can be merely disguise for emptiness, that the last man already walks among us, that solitude is strength, not weakness, that love hides power games, that God's death left us without ground, and that still there exists a call to create new values, to dare being overman. What Nietzsche asks isn't that we flee from life, but that we affirm it with intensity, even in its harshness. It's not about seeking perfect existence, but authentic existence, made of risks, pains, and conquests, truly worthwhile. His warning isn't to destroy us, but to awaken us. And now, I ask you, what was the belief that most imprisoned you until today? Comfort? Fear of solitude? The illusion of love as salvation? Or waiting for meaning coming from outside? Share your answer in the comments. I want to know where you're watching us from, how this thinking echoes in your life, and if you also feel the urgency to transform your existence into something greater. If this reflection resonated with you, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and help expand this community of thinkers who don't fear looking into darkness. Thank you for being here. Together, we're creating a space of depth and courage in an increasingly superficial world.